Thanks for taking some time to spend an hour with us this afternoon. I can't think of many topics more important. Um, this is our first meeting of the Minds discussion during the Utah State of Mind, Connect Summit County's first annual mental health symposium. As Betty said, my name's Ian Crossland. I'm the head of school at a little preschool through 8th grade independent school here in Park City called Park City Day School. I'm also proud to be a board member of Connect Summit County. The mission of Connect Summit County is to create a well-informed, stigma-free community with access to mental health resources for everyone. In order to do this, we must talk about the places where mental health is a factor, not in an office with a therapist, but where in our community, mental health impacts our citizens, including our young adults and children. So before we get going, I'd like to turn it back over to Betty, who's going to give us a couple more tips. Before doing that, I also do want to thank the Park City Board of Realtors and their philanthropic foundation for sponsoring the Utah State of Mind event. Their generous support has really given us the resources to make an impact on mental health in our community. So thank you, Park City Board of Realtors. Back to you for a moment, Betty.
Thanks, Ian. As I said, as all of you are coming on here, this is being recorded and we are on Facebook Live. So you can make a choice about if you would like your face to be seen, unless your name is Ian Crossland, Ben Belknap, or Ben Springer. You all have to keep your cameras on. If you have questions during this conversation, please feel free to put them in the chat. We may or may not actually get to questions. We have a lot of cool stuff to talk about. But if you have questions and you want to share them with us, we're happy to see about finding answers for you later. And it can also help you stay engaged. So please remain muted so that if a dog barks in your neighborhood or your vacuum turns on, as mine does, we don't accidentally see you pop up in our screen. So thanks so much, Ian, and right back to you, sir.
All right. So as Betty and I mentioned, we're fortunate to have a couple local experts with us who spend their time working with youth in our communities. Apparently, to be on this panel, you needed to have very little hair on the top of your head and a lot on your face. Beyond that, I assure you, both Dr. Bens bring a world of expertise to this conversation. So we have Dr. Ben Belknap from the Park City School District and Dr. Ben Springer from Wasatch School District. I'd love to just pause before we get the conversation going deeper and have each of you just say a little bit about the work you're doing, about your backstory. Dr. Belknap, would you mind getting us going?
Sounds great. Thank you. I never pass up an opportunity to talk about myself. Thank you, Ian. I was trained as a school psychologist with Dr. Springer. We met in graduate school actually, and it was a very behavioral program. We learned a lot about behavioral interventions and things like that. It was great. And then I moved on and I started practicing clinically in the private world and with Primary Children's Hospital, and learned a different approach to beyond that behaviors. And so I've kind of bounced back and forth between clinical fields and the educational field. And where I really draw a lot of value is finding that overlap between, setting limits and accountability and reinforcing behavior that we need, that behavioral lens, while also recognizing the importance of our connection, validation, and the emotional part of our relationships with our kids, and where that sweet spot is when those two things are blended, because there's room for both. And I feel like, and that's definitely my life or my work's passion, is to be able to blend those two models. And where I found myself currently as an administrator in Park City School District, overseeing a lot of our counseling and mental health and student wellness initiatives. We're hoping to, that's what we've got a lot of really great people here in the district that are helping to kind of further that mission. So that's kind of where we are here.
Thank you. How about you, Dr. Springer?
Well, I was prepared to introduce Dr. Belknap. I wanted to share a little bit more than he's willing to share about himself. And Ben, all I want to say is this. He is a dear friend. We met in grad school. And what he's not telling you is if you spend 15 minutes with Dr. Belknap, he will help you in like a real meaningful way. It doesn't matter what you're talking about, whether it was, where to go for lunch or, some big, heavy, deep discussion. He can help people really quickly. It's pretty incredible. So besides my just esteemed affection for Ben Belknap, we cut our teeth working together at the University of Utah. I think we have a lot of shared interests, a lot of shared perspectives on mental health. The biggest thing that I think we share, we did our research together at the University of Utah on a lot of parent outreach and a lot of how do you help kids not just in a vacuum, right? Because in schools, that's kind of what can happen. So I've been really passionate about how do we help kids and, both in the micro, like help the student and their needs right now, and in the macro. So I would say that's kind of what I've been up to. And, along with what Dr. Belknap was saying, our whole school district is built to support this. It's not just one person or one program. It's really systemic with the school principals and counselors and social workers and psychologists, and just as you all know. So that's where my current role is now, is kind of helping coordinate and orchestrate those services here along with other folks here at the district.
Fantastic. Well, we're so grateful to have both of you with us. And thanks again for the work you're doing in our communities. This topic, of course, is super personal, and it's based on relationships, as you both said. However, to sort of frame and ground this conversation, it seems like it could be helpful to start with some data. And what we have, and I think Betty can share this in the chat, is every few years, the state conducts a student health and risk prevention survey. They call it the SHARP assessment. And it's really a opportunity to take a snapshot of the risks facing our youth. They monitor data from 6th graders up through 12th graders and look at drug and alcohol use, but also, key issues surrounding mental health. And we have some data that came out in 2019, pre-COVID. So of course, there's some different elements that we can look at and see how this may have shifted over the last year. But let's start there, if you don't mind, Ben. And I would ask you sort of as an opening question, when you look at that data, what stands out to you? What trends do you see, or what points do you think we should take away from that?
Yeah, the things that stand out for me, it's pretty great. Like when we're always interested in helping kids, right? And you can get lost in miss the forest for the trees without just straight up asking the child, right? And that's what's great about SHARP. It's 100% anonymous. So you're getting real answers. This isn't some small sample size either. These are real high school, secondary age kids in both of our counties answering anonymously. And, you could think of any teacher or principal or administrator, being fearful of that type of a report. But as Ben will tell you and could agree, kids are amazing and they genuinely care about this stuff. If you ask a child about these things, they're going to give you honest answers. And of course, there's going to be some kids that goof around with it. But by and large, the most impressive part for me for the data is this is first person. This is the kids talking. So that's my favorite takeaway.
And I would add to that too, that the other thing, I think there are preconceived ideas of our different communities and of kids. I think sometimes, I'll be honest, I fall into that kind of old school mentality. I'll tell you, you kids get out of their phones and they don't even know how to interact anymore. And that, it's and so I think at some level, so a couple of things that really jumped out at me would be I think sometimes we feel the house is on fire here. Our kids, their mental health is so much worse now than it was then. Drug use is so much worse than it was when I was a kid. When we really crunch the numbers and look at it, the kids are all right. All right. Now, obviously there's a lot of area for concern. There's always room for improvement. but I don't feel like we're necessarily at terminal velocity, you know, with our mental health of kids. And that's a good thing. And I think that also comes, I think sometimes we think it's worse than it is, perhaps because we are much more open about it and it's less stigmatized. Whereas, you know, maybe when we were children, that wasn't something you talked about. So we didn't realize how pervasive mental health struggles were. But the other thing that really jumped out too is these preconceived ideas of different communities. When I took this job in Park City 4 years ago, I had a lot of people tell me, oh yeah, I'll tell you, Park City's just different. You know, you got a lot of kids with a lot of time on their hands, drug use, and, you know, rich kids, I'll tell you, that's what it is. And then I told people I was going to move to Heber, which is where I lived. It was kind of like it was painted to me as this ultra conservative community and kind of a farm town and rural. Well, turns out you look at the numbers, Ben, we're not so different, you and I, you know, down in Wasatch County and Park City. So, and it's pretty consistent with the state data too. And I think that's important because sometimes we can think, oh, you know, again, like the world is burning, the sky is falling here in this specific pocket because that's what we know. Now, again, I don't want to seem like I'm discounting what's actually going on. There are problems. There are always going to be problems, but it helps me at least not feel completely overwhelmed that like, this is something, you know, we can all work toward. Now getting obviously, you know, specifically into the numbers, there of course, substance abuse is scary. How early kids are doing it, the change in technology where kids can go and vape, you know, nicotine or marijuana in cars and not come back smelling like it. So it's a lot harder to detect. People can do it. It's a lot easier to do even in class, we've had issues of students doing this. So that accessibility, I think it does a couple of things. It feels a lot less scary for a young kid now it's one thing if you pass me an electronic looking little device and all I got to do is press this button and suck it versus pulling this gross smelling stuff out of a bag and stuffing it into this weird looking pipe and getting a lighter and it's like, it's different. That world is different. And I think because it doesn't look so scary, it's a lot easier to access, or at least easier to kind of justify, I think, in a lot of kids' minds. And that's kind of scary. But I also don't want to get too focused on the substance abuse piece as much as the mental health piece too, because it's a dual thing. So, you know, I know a lot about Connect's mission, which I totally agree is to destigmatize mental health, to get us to a place where we can reach out, we can ask, and we can help one another. And so some of the data points there really kind of that jumped out at me, and I appreciate Betty kind of guiding us in that direction. That it seems that in both communities, Wasatch and Park City, that people are really, really willing to help a friend, help a family member with struggles to mental health. But we're not so when it comes to us seeking it out ourselves or really giving ourselves an honest look in the mirror about our own mental health, we kind of struggle. And so to me, that kind of says, yeah, we're totally open. Like, that's great. I will help you with it, but not quite so open to the point where we say, well, but not me. I don't have a problem. And so there's that explicit sort of like way that we illustrate that we're destigmatizing mental health, but are we actually internalizing that with our own behavior? So that's kind of what jumps at the page. A few things jump off the page there.
No, thank you. And just to put a couple numbers on that for those who didn't have time to follow the link and open the, the document. There was a question asked, do you think it's okay to seek help and talk to a professional counselor, therapist, or doctor if you've been feeling sad, hopeless, or suicidal? And our rates, our percentiles are pretty close to 90% across the board. So that's a really positive data point. Conversely, the other point you're making, Ben, is that when we asked young adults, how often in the last 30 days did you talk to an adult about feeling sad, hopeless, or suicidal? The numbers are much, much smaller, well under 20%. And I guess there could be a caveat that maybe they're not feeling sad or hopeless or depressed. So of course it's not comparing apples to apples. On that point about depression though, I did want to ask you both, I see another trend in the data that's not as encouraging, which is across the cohorts from 6th grade, 8th grade, 10th, 12th, and cumulatively, the rates of high depressive symptoms are really increasing. and they're still low. So we're under 10% of students in that category. Do you see a similar trend in the work you're doing in your schools, or does this, how does that land for you?
In Wasatch County School District, and I think these type of trends, you can actually go on Sharp and you can see, I think it goes back even like maybe like 10 years even of the trends. So that's a really cool perspective to see like different changes. And it kind of references what Dr. Belknap was saying about they exist. These are perennial concerns, but they put it in perspective. And by and large, these data are really straightforward. I mean, you're seeing, we can start to tease apart why they're reporting higher or lower, and that's, part of our job at dissecting these data. But one of the best thing to do with data points is to kind of cross-reference it with the whole picture, right? With the whole painting. And one thing that we want to, that we have control over in our capacities in schools is what is the climate or the safety kind of the vibes that you get at school, because kids won't express their depressive mood states or their mood if they don't feel safe doing it. And that's a universal thing for all of us, right? Like part of destigmatizing mental health is to help people feel safe about both talking about it and just being open about struggles. And what we find in schools, and when I was looking at the Sharp data, is kids 100% are feeling above average safe in schools to talk to educators. And those, from where I sit on the mental health kind of lens in a school, it's our teachers that are really fielding a lot of the expressions of these moods. And then, that might get referred to a school counselor, or, we bring in more supports as needed, depending on a case by case situation. But from where I stand, these are they're pretty even keeled across the years. These reports for when it comes specifically to depression and depressive mood states. And I would say that depression is underreported universally from kids all the way up to adults, just because depression as it exists is very cyclical, right? There are going to be months where I'm depressed, but then there's gonna be months where I'm totally not. And that's one of the drawbacks about data points that are locked in time, is they are snapshots. And as we know, mental health is much more fluid than a data point and a snapshot. And I think that's the one thing to take that we can glean. At least I know when I look at data like this, you take it for what it is. It's 100% really great data from the student's perspective. But then our job is to kind of frame it from our experience and understanding of mental health and put that in a bigger picture. And so the two correlates that I like to put together are, what are the risk factors they're facing, and how safe do they feel at school? And if they feel safe at school, we're doing a really, really great job as best we can, right? Because the first step in reaching out for help is feeling safe to do that.
Thank you. I'd like to pick up on something that you said and sort of shift this conversation to what we're doing in schools. But before I do that, I just want to see if there's any other takeaways either of you wanted to offer from the Sharp data.
Yeah, I got a note too on that depression piece. I think we would be remiss if we didn't recognize the impact of technology on mental health of our kids, and I would say in a good way and a negative way, right? Positive. There are positives and negatives about it. We can talk about all the things that we hear a lot about, that it's so much, rejection is so much more in our face, our level of popularity, or how much kids like us with the amounts of reactions we get on social media, that kind of thing. I think we, all kind of recognize that piece. What I find is when I see these these rising rates of reported symptoms of depression, on one hand, I think that I would, looking through that technology lens, is that the world of a child is much smaller. My world as a kid was kids I went to school with, and I went to Bear Lake High School. And if you hung out with somebody from Preston High School, you were a traitor because they were our rival. And now kids, they all know everybody, and that's a good thing. And, it's a positive and a negative. And on a positive note, I think when our kids read about depression or they answer a question related to depression, it has been destigmatized enough through these conversations, through these wider circles, social circles, that they recognize that maybe that what I might have discounted as feeling kind of a little down from time to time might actually be a depression. So it's that awareness actually can lead to an increase in reporting of those symptoms, and that's a good thing. On the other hand, one thing we got to be aware of is that in these groups, and I see this a lot in my work previously, working clinically, especially in long-term residential treatment centers, is kids can also find each other in these negative spaces, and they can have these commiserating type of discussions that not just that take normalizing mental health into a more extreme area of overly pathologizing it, overly commiserating, and a support group around how to negatively cope with those mental health struggles. And so again, I think that comes back to, and I'm sure we'll touch on this later, but like a lot of that preventative work that we do with our kids, not just around limits we set on social media, but actual honest discussions around that, and that sort of fostering that sort of relationship of trust.
Yeah, thanks for jumping in, Ben. That's a really important point. And actually, let's follow this line of the conversation. Given the mission of Connect and our real focus on destigmatization, I'd love to hear from both of you how you see that. Where are we with destigmatization around mental health, and could you compartmentalize the different players that really need to be on board to support a student, in the sense of teachers and school staff, parents, and other youth? Where are we solid with destigmatization? Where does it still exist? How do you see that right now?
Yeah, I think that's the great, such a great mission that y'all have, and which is why I was really excited to participate in this, because it's really valuable, and any organization that wants to help with that is, it's a big deal. And I would say the biggest challenge is destigmatization is all about representation, right? And I'm staring at a screen. We even made a joke at the beginning. We're all these white males with receding hairlines, right? And we need more representation from diverse populations is a really big barrier that mental health, the way it's experienced, varies from culture to culture, from gender to gender, from whatever anybody's identifying with. There's a whole, for legitimately a spectrum of how individuals experience mental health. And that's one thing that Dr. Belknap taught me in one of our many drives across the state or wherever we're traveling, is that everybody's experience is the first thing that makes a good therapist, is understanding that everybody's experience is unique. And one thing that I know we could do a lot better at is just diversity of representation, right? In that voice of mental health. I could talk to you all day about, the middle class white male version of what mental health destigmatization is, but that's not enough. It's not inclusive. And so I would say one mission that I know we have, that we're actively trying to work on in our district, is just more active representation from any kind of, diverse group. And that's something that we're working really hard on now with Encircle and our LGBTQ community. And we have so much work to do even more in that area. And along with our Hispanic and Latinx, community, it's just something that they're underrepresented in this conversation, and a lot of other things, obviously. So the good thing is, we talk about it. You've all know there's pop culture things, and when somebody of like a sports star or a celebrity expresses their experience with mental health, that's representation, and that's really, really powerful. Kids will talk about it. Families will talk about it. I mean, you can find any podcast at any moment today and find people actually talking about it. So I think there is really strong representation for destigmatization, but it's still for that kind of the majority, right? I still think we need a lot more diverse voices in that realm. So that's kind of my take on it.
I appreciate that, and I think that at a more like at a micro level with our families, one thing that I try to practice myself as a parent, and I try to encourage other parents to do the same, is be treating it. I think sometimes we send an implicit message to our kids you know, if we have a child in therapy or a child on medication or something, that like, hey, this is your little secret, and we're going to kind of keep hush about this. And when I check you out of school to go to therapy, I'm going to tell them, you know, we'll tell them it's for the orthodontist or something like that. And there are different ways we go around that. Now, we have to respect our kids' wishes and our kids' privacy. Obviously, I'm not going to get on my roof with a megaphone and tell everybody, you know, my child has depression, right? But the way we talk about it is absolutely critical with our kids. Not like, hey, this is a real problem, I want to support you. That's like, I mean, that's a good place to start. But beyond that, like, hey, this is a problem, how are we going to combat that? I think is really, really important. The first thing I do with kids in therapy, whether they come into a treatment setting or outpatient setting and say they have depression, is I tell them, the goal here is to not make your depression go away. The goal here is to change your relationship with your depression, because your relationship with your depression dictates on how it runs your life or whether it runs your life. It is absolutely critical that our kids recognize that depression in many cases also opens a different perspective on the world for them. And it can, in many ways, be something that enriches their life, which sounds really crazy, right? But if we view this as like, this is a bad thing, it needs to go away, we need to make it go away like a cancer, then it's going to continue to be sort of a shameful thing. And we're going to get resistance from our kids that is going to be like, no, that's not me. I don't need therapy. That's for crazy people. So just casual dinner time conversations about that is absolutely critical, in just normalizing discussions around it.
Such good points. Thank you both. I'm reminded that of our responsibility, right, as adults and as parents in this area. But I'm also, it makes me think about, with such admiration, the way young adults and kids can also lead us to a better place of understanding. And I'm wondering if you've seen how you see this generationally. You know, if I would say that in areas such as gender identity and race, places like that, we're making a lot of progress quickly as a society. Not quickly enough, but we're moving along. In a lot of ways, change and destigmatization has been ushered in and led by young people. And I'm wondering if you sense something similar in the area of mental health, or if we're still in a different place where there's still a heavy stigmatization amongst kids.
That's a great question. And like, I do this thing, we have this pre-teacher program in Wasatch where kids can sign, you know, take a class and learn about the educational field, like post-high school stuff. And they invite me every year. And it's one of my most favorite things I get to do, is just like literally walk into the high school as a complete dork and a nerd and talk to them about the future, you know, like being an educator and my background as a school psychologist, and just what I learned from those experiences working with kids is, when we discuss, and Dr. Belknap was alluding to this about his approach about kind of owning depression and not like trying to cure it. And this kind of philosophy that Ben and I adhere to is under this umbrella of positive psychology. And when we frame, and that's a real huge part of destigmatization, is how you frame mental health. And you'll see now it's more about wellness than illness, right? That's a huge, just that one change in the word is a huge step forward to helping this. And when you bring that lens to kids and you approach wellness, they are locked in. Like, I'm always expecting to go into high school and them to be completely bored or whatever about my geekiness. And they're completely like, whoa, tell me more about, you know, Chick Sent Me High's experience of optimal experience and flow. They want to know like the nitty gritty stuff about, like, how do I get happy? What you mean there's steps to being happy? It's not just happens when you're lucky. Like, you can actually take ownership over your feelings and your happiness and your relationships. And I'm telling you right now, kids are locked into this. I think they need to probably talk more about it to folks and take Dr. Belknap's advice about, kind of as parents and as teachers and educators, if we talk about it and we're open about it, kids are they're not less curious. In fact, in the information age, they will surprise you at how much their curiosity has led them to. So I think it's all about framing it in the wellness realm for kids, and they are all ears. That's been my experience.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, kind of adding to that, it's a great point, Ben, that our kids, I mean, they have like I said earlier, a different world than us, and they have an incredibly unique perspective. And so I think, I remember when I was in graduate school, I saw a study that I had such a hard time wrapping my head around, that basically said, especially when a young child experiences any kind of a variety of trauma, it's the adult's response to that trauma that can actually really create a problem, that really create that PTSD around it. Because like, especially our young kids, when something happens or when they experience something, they immediately look to us to see, is this an okay thing? Should I be freaked out about this? I mean, how many times, think about, if you had a young child, 2-3 years old, where they fall and skin their knee, and before they start to cry, they look up at you. And then, and if you're like running like, are you okay? Immediately, then the tears come, and there's this beautiful middle ground. And it's so difficult to find middle ground of recognizing the issue and being there as care and concern for your child, but also not going so far over that we're creating that re-traumatization. Oh, coddling, you poor thing. Like, that's because you're depressed. Of course you don't need to go to school today. Of course you can take this comfort item with you to school. But the problem is, if we go too far out of that middle ground, it really turns quickly into, hey, suck it up, go to school, keep a stiff upper lip, nobody wants to hear about it. And so finding that is absolutely critical. And I think, the way we can do that is really going to, is allowing our children to have that space to talk, and then how we respond. Ben and I train on this all the time, but we need to be really careful as parents to look beyond this. What you see is what you get, as far as like the behavior. And, they're crying, they're avoiding, they're not going to school. And so we want to jump in and say, don't do that. This is not okay. Here's something you can do. And we want to fix it. Oh, maybe my child, they're isolating in their room, so I need to help get them some activities. Let's go and let's move them along. Well, that's critical. We have to do that. But what we also have to do, and it's really difficult as a parent, and I'm really good at telling other people to do this with their kids and really bad at it with my own kids. Okay. So, but if we can take what we actually see, let's say it's, your child says, I'm feeling really sad. I'm feeling really depressed. I don't know, this feels really strange to me. Our child's best protective factor is they're not looking for us to fix that for them. All right. And they're not looking for us to put a silver lining around that either, which is kind of where I try to go. Well, really, look at all the things you've got going for you in your life. Are you kidding? Why would you pop? And I know this, I'm trained on this, right? But where we need to go is that next level down. And we need to recognize that a child's behavior, or what a child says, is really a window into their soul. It's a window in what they're experiencing in their heart. So if we can go down to the next level and say, okay, there's a feeling there that is driving this. So how can I validate that feeling, without presenting a solution? And it really can be a pretty simple thing and the first thing I got to do is go to my headspace there, instead of, oh, I'm the genius here, and I'm going to give you all the answers that are going to change your life. You got to work harder. You got to, whatever else, which is totally where I want to go. Right. I've got to put myself in check and say, what's driving this? And then go to validating that emotion, because I may not agree with my child who's isolating herself in her room because she's super depressed. And I might think, you just need to get your butt out of bed and start moving and doing something. But I can recognize that feeling, that when I also feel really down and I don't want to do anything either. And when I can go to that level with her and say, I am so sorry you're feeling that way. That is a really, really awful way to feel. And I've been there, and I don't like feeling that way either. If you ever want to talk more about this, I'm totally happy to be there. And you just leave it that. And it feels really hard as a parent, because we feel like we got to walk in, we got to give the solution. But it is absolutely incredible when we give our kids the space how freeing that can be for them. Oh, okay, cool. Like, and it may not work that first time or the second or third time, but over time, when that is our consistent response, we're telling our kids, your emotions are important, and there's no such thing as a negative emotion and a positive emotion. They are all just our emotions, and we need to lean into them. And where the pathology begins is when we try to shove some emotions aside and create a positive, what we perceive as a positive emotion. Instead, we need to lean in and allow ourselves to experience it fully and healthily. And that comes through appropriate expression and validation in that relationship.
That's fantastic, Ben. I couldn't agree more. And boy, is that hard to do when you're in the moment as a parent. And, and that's probably another small takeaway. At least I'll give myself this one, which is being a parent is challenging too in and of itself. And we're going to have our own emotions and stresses and issues around that. So as we're being gentle with our kids, let's do the same to ourselves. While we're talking about parenting, I feel like another challenge in our community everywhere, but especially here where there's lots of opportunity is what's the right balance between sort of support and expectations. And, we want to open doors for our children. We want them to reach their fullest potential. But when does that become too much and an emotional burden that's unfair to put on a child? Do either of you have any insights that you could help us with?
Hold on. Let me grab my soapbox here, Ian, and stand on it. Change my my camera angle here. I'll keep this as brief as I can, but this is something I'm very passionate about. And I've got 4 kids ranging from age 10 to 17. And so, I'm kind of in the throes right now where I'm like, man, I wish I could just like keep my kids till they're about 12 and then let somebody else raise them from there. And maybe they can come back, at some point when they're nice and likable again. But my soapbox here, both as a parent and professional, is that when I do parent trainings, when Ben and I do parent trainings together, one question we love to start with is, what do you want for your child? When it's all said and done, your child's 18, they're done with high school and moving on. What do you want? What's one thing that will say, yep, you did a good job, and we get a variety of answers, at that basic level of like, depending on what college they got into, what are their life goals, but ultimately as parents have space to process, we all come back to the same spot. I want my child to have a sense of self-confidence and have a positive relationship, a good relationship with me, an open, honest relationship. And that is such an important perspective to keep, because in the day-to-day stuff, we think, well, we've got to help move them along. They need this extra thing, or they need more structure. And that is really, really important. But an experience, I had in keeping that in mind, was I was at a career fair at the high school a couple of years ago, and a parent, it was right toward the end of the school year, and a parent came up. I was standing by one of the assistant principals, and a parent said, hey, okay, so it's my daughter's last year. She's just finishing her junior year, going into her senior year. I've got her in this, prep course, and I've got her working in this volunteer place to help kind of boost her resume to get in. And just laid out the entire summer for this student. And she said, what else do you recommend to help her, get her out, on into her senior year, to take advantage of this last summer we have with her at home? And the AP at the high school just turned and took advantage of the fact that I was there and said, well, it turns out our director of wellness is right here in the school district, Dr. Belknap. What do you think? And I was just like, oh, come on, totally put on the spot. But the answer I gave this parent is the answer I need to give myself more often. And I think it is something we all need to hear at some level, but it wasn't very well received. And what I said was, honestly, like if it were me, and if I was just following all the research about what's best for our kids, I would take your child out of every one of those things this summer and let them enjoy their last summer as a kid, because life comes at you really, really quick. So what are you going to do as a parent to ensure that when your child does leave to college and in October of their freshman year, they are blackout drunk at a party and they are worried about their safety. What are you going to do this summer between your child's junior and senior year that will make them more likely to call you to get help than less likely? Because everything we do with our kids is putting them in a position to be more likely to rely on us in those kinds of times or less likely. There is no homeostasis. That kind of thing is not through signing them up for a million things, because, and that is, it's important that they have those positive alternative activities, but ultimately it's our openness and our ability to connect with them that is most important. And that's what guides the future, the long-term mental health for our kids. And boy, I'd love to go on for another hour about that, but I won't. I'm going to stop myself.
No, thank you. That's so well said. Dr. Springer, could you jump in there?
Yeah, it was a shameless plug for my book on parenting that comes out in a few weeks. So there you go. One thing I just want everyone to know, don't write a parenting book, because then all of a sudden all eyes are on your children, and if you even know what you're talking about. And the truth of the matter is the perspective that I come through from the book, which is called GPS. So it's just a play on, the navigation system but good parenting strategies. And it was written, I was asked to write it for the pandemic, right? Because this has been the ultimate test for parents. And so that's where this book came from, and it's how to navigate the pandemic and beyond. And so there's the shameless plug for that, if you're interested in that. But the one thing I do want to get out of the way is, I think I was asked to write the book because I'm being straight up vulnerable and honest about not being a great parent, right? Like, people have to get this idea of expertise out of their mind all the time, particularly when it comes to parenting. And Ben just nailed it. Like, the human part of parenting is probably more valuable than any sort of great disciplinarian, or they have all these activities plans for their kids. It's just about being human. It's about helping your kids see what adulthood, hey, sometimes this is hard. Sometimes, what we're doing is the hardest work. And the first chapter of my book, or any parent training that Ben or I will ever do, always starts with how to effectively battle shame and guilt. That's the first chapter of the book, because Ben and I could share tools all day with parents, for parents. If they don't learn how to battle their internal, issues with guilt and shame, they completely start skewing and it falls into parenting. And that's a discovery over the past, 15, 20 years working with parents and parent trainings that I've stumbled upon, is like, we are our own worst enemies, honestly. You can learn 100 parenting strategies, but if you don't learn how to battle guilt and shame, that's where it's really hard work. So yeah, there's a whole chapter on that in the book, and the rest is just tools. So there you go. You can check that out if you don't want to listen to me ramble about it.
Thank you, Ben. Yes, you can. We'll share a link to that book coming out. And as you're talking, Ben, another thing comes to mind of like, back to one of the first things I said about kind of crossing that behavioral lens through the relational lens, and there's room for both. I had, I'll be a little vulnerable now, with an experience I had with my 17-year-old daughter, my junior, just this weekend. I got to make sure my wife's not on here first, because I'll catch an earful if she is. No, it's not that bad. Basically, on Saturday, we had little chores that all of our kids needed to complete by the end of the day. And my daughter had a couple of things she needed to get done. And before she go hang out with friends, she said they were done. And as she was getting ready to leave with her friends at about 5 o'clock, my wife went down and looked, and she said, no, this is not done. You've shoved a bunch of stuff under your bed. I mean, this whole thing. So like, really get it done, and then you can go with your friends. Well, we had to go take off and do something, and we got home, and my daughter had taken off with her friends anyway and not done this, right? So she's 17. What do? I can't go like chase her down and drag her and pick her up and put her in our car, even though I wanted to. And so I kind of had this spot thinking, I'm emotional, I'm upset, and I feel, because if we go too far to that area, I felt betrayed essentially by my daughter. As small of a thing as I'm going to see, because she sent us a text message, said, I'm going anyway. and what are you going to do about it? Right. So immediately I'm like, oh, right. But then I had to allow a consequence to let it drive how I was going to do. Because if I don't have some sort of a structure of an expectation for you, then I am going to rely too heavily on my own inferences and my own emotions at the time. And that's when she's going to get the screaming and the yelling. And that is the close. That's what closes the door. And research, replicated studies again and again and again have demonstrated that kids go underground about stuff that they're doing. They become sneaky, which is the danger zone, not out of fear of consequence, but out of fear of the parent's emotional response to them. Right. So that is, I mean, and that kind of blew my mind the first time I read that. So, because we think, oh, they just don't want to get in trouble. No, they don't want to see us freak out. That's just too much for them, right? So as Ben and I do in our teacher trainings all the time, we'd say our emotional response to a situation is the best predictor of the outcome. So luckily we had developed a consequence structure that if you do these things, this is going to be the negative consequence. So then I was able to remain in that neutral emotional space with my daughter and not call her, scream, yell, and instead come back to, right? Okay, you made this choice. There's nothing I can do about that. I'm not going to go chase you down to wherever you went with your friends. These will be the consequences, end of story. And then I am not allowing my daughter's bad behavior to dictate my relationship with her, because that's the problem, is our relationship can get defined by negativity, by conflict, right? So that is that opportunity. So now I say that, we're like, okay, now I'm myself losing myself in like, okay, we're talking about mental health destigmatization, right? But that comes down to, if our kids are avoiding going to school, if they're cutting class, if it's things like that, where they're like, but it's my mental health. I need to have my phone. I need to be on my phone all the time at night because I need my music, and that's what helps me not be anxious, whatever it is. It's okay to have consequences and to have structure around, well, here's what's going to happen if you cut class, and to have the space to go in and support the child. And we can live in both of those worlds. And it's not that difficult if we can keep those consequence structures consistent here and set it up beforehand, before people are ticked off and they take off with their friends without permission. And then we can focus just on the relationship and let the consequences do the work on the other end of things. So it's not mixing those. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. We have about 10 minutes left. I'd love to bring the conversation back to the school districts, and the work you're doing a little bit, or a lot, in our schools. One of the challenges we see this year, pronounced even more through COVID, is the multiple expectations we're putting on our teachers, and the hats we're asking them to wear, not only as, education experts, content area experts, but as counselors, as, social workers. And I'm wondering how you're capacitating your staffs, what you see sort of in both in a micro scale, sort of here in our systems, but also across the country, in sort of what role should schools play in serving kids with mental health needs, or as Ben Springer said earlier, as promoting wellness. What can we do, or are we doing, to help our teachers do this well? Or is that a fair ask?
Well, I think I'm so glad you brought that up, because the past year, if it's taught us anything about education, is just how valuable teachers are. And the last thing you ever want to do is take an excellent teacher and just burn them out say, do everything for the child. I need you not only to be progress to a rigorous curriculum. I need you to be their caretaker, their therapist. You're going to teach them yoga in your downtime. Now, that being said, there are teachers, bless their hearts. Ben and I are both if it's not obvious yet, we're both the sons of lifelong educators. We have a deep love for our parents that worked literally their whole lives teaching and working in education. And so the last thing, when Ben and I, as passionate as we are about wellness and mental health, the last thing we're ever going to do is be the proponents of teacher burnout. And I have a really strong opinion about it. I feel comfortable sharing this with you all right now about it, is until social emotional learning is an end of level test, don't bug teachers to do it, because they can't do two things well. None of us on this call, no human being on the planet can do two things really, really well. And there are two separate things. And don't get me wrong, there are strategies that educators can use and school counselors can use in schools. But anybody that wants to talk and come, talk with me about what it really takes to do SEL, that was what my dissertation was on. What does it take to teach? How much time does it take to teach social emotional learning to kids in the school setting? And the results are not sexy, everybody. It takes a ton of time. It takes a ton of time. And I know it. I work front lines on it. And to ask the teachers to do it in a meaningful way, it's a huge ask. And so as leaders and administrators, we have to work with our teachers and our legislators. And this whole kind of, the macro part of it is, if you really want to prioritize mental health, let's make it happen. Let's make an end of level outcome for this. If you're not going to do that, then do not burn out our teachers, because if we learned anything in the past year, we lose them, we are screwed. So that's my opinion on it, and I'm sticking to it.
And I'll say too on that, to that end, is again going back to our emotional response being the best predictor of the outcome, is that if our teachers if they feel supported from our schools, if they feel supported with a behavior team, with mental health professionals, personnel, that it's usually uncertainty about what to do that creates an emotional escalate, our own emotional escalation that drives that. So if they know that they've got somebody they can talk to, they know that all they've got to do right now is focus on teaching, then that can help them, put them in that space. But another thing, we try to do with our teachers too is recognize the individual needs of our kids. And teachers are so adept at that and getting better and better, that if we can recognize the emotion, the needs of specific kids, like you can talk about it and with these teachers, you can say, you know what, until this child learns how to regulate, until this child can actually, have some sort of a social connection in this classroom, they're not going to be able to probably learn how to read very well. So we can kind of individualize that student's path. And as maybe a successful year for this student may not be that they caught up to grade level in reading, but maybe, we can sort of scale that back and reframe it to a successful year is they didn't run out of the classroom anymore crying and screaming when given a limit. Because that is that, if you think of like Maslow's hierarchy, right? That is the foundational piece before we can get to that academic piece. And when teachers have permission from us as district administrators and as parents and as community partners, say, you know what, yes, maybe we're not going to sit down and like put that kid in the seat. And as we've seen actually sometimes, like almost like restraining a child in their seat saying, read this, no, read, and they're freaking out. If teachers have the permission to say, success for the student this year is going to be this behavioral piece, then that puts them in a much better emotional space too. And to Ben's point, that's what's going to help prevent burnout. But that's something that needs to be communicated implicitly to teachers from every level, including community, parents, and district office.
That's a great point, Ben. And you're right. We send so many contrary signals to that with what we say or what we show as important through our actions as administrators and legislatures. It's one more thing to ask of teachers, to just actually ignore what we've set as expectations for you and also teach something else. Tough ask. Gentlemen, we are closing in on the end of our session. And I'm going to stay to my timelines if I do nothing else today. So I just want to thank you both. I can tell you, as a fellow educator, as a parent, I've learned a lot, and I wish we could keep going deeper. We've scratched the surface on a dozen really important topics. I know I feel good knowing the two of you are working in our community. So once again, thanks for all you're doing. Ben Springer, can't wait to get your book, and thank you both for spending some time with us today. With that, I will turn it back over to Betty.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Ian, for leading such an insightful conversation. And Ben, I just sat here in tears for the majority of that conversation. So thank you for your honesty and your passion for not only the work that you do, but for the children and the parents who are part of your communities. So with that, I would just like to remind everyone here that Connect Summit County, one of our main programs is our peer navigation services. So if you or someone that you know or love needs resources for mental health, that's what we do. You can call our English peer navigation line or our Spanish peer navigation line, depending on the language that you speak most. And we are here to connect you, the community member, the individual, with resources, with the therapists, with the support groups, with all of the resources that exist in our community. And we also wanted to highlight today that we do have a mobile crisis outreach team in Summit and Wasatch counties, where our peer navigation services from Connect Summit County is a non-crisis line. You can request a mobile outreach team if you call 911 or a crisis line for a loved one or yourself. So we wanted to make sure that everyone had that information and had a moment to see that those resources are available to you. We also just wanted to, excuse me, to say thank you. Thank you for your willingness to attend this event and to be part of this really, really important conversation in our community. And we at Connect Summit County value your feedback. It is important for us to understand how well we've done or not so well in these events. So I have put a link in the chat to our event feedback survey. We really would love it if you would take a moment and complete that. And if you're not able to do it right now, we will email it to you, but you always forget to do it. So just click on it now and get it done. It'll take you like a minute, maybe not even that. And we also just want to say that, you know, we're a nonprofit, right? And Connect Summit County is committed to bringing you our peer navigation services and bringing you events like this, programming and resources into our community no matter what. And so if you value the programming that we offer, we also invite you to click that last link in your chat box and become a donor today. You know, just say thanks with a couple bucks if you've got it, because then we really know that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. So with that, thank you all so much for being here today. Ian, Ben, you are amazing human beings, and we're really, really grateful. Thank you all so much, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Betty.
Bye, everybody.